Hi, everybody. My name is Christa Yelich-Koth. I am an author and an editor, and welcome to my writing, editing, and publishing Q&A session. This is my first one. I am very excited about it, and I am currently live on Twitch. You can follow me and subscribe at twitch.tv/ChristaYK, ChristAYK, to watch these live. If you're on my YouTube channel right now and watching it, I hope that you enjoy the information that's going to come. I plan to answer questions that were either submitted to me or come to me live, and this will be happening the last Sunday of every month at 2 p.m. Pacific time and will run about an hour. Um, I myself am an author of comic books and full-length novels. I have been published since 2012 and have been a professional editor since 2013. So I decided to start running this Q&A session because when I first started out, I found that I had a lot of questions and I wasn't really sure where to get my information from. So I thought, since I've been doing this for a while and I've led workshops and I've been to conventions and I've been to conferences, maybe I could give a little bit back, because I had a lot of people that helped me out when I was first starting as well. I'm also the author of Quickie Edits, which came out last summer. It is a way to help you self-edit a little bit if you are a writer yourself and not just a fan of my books. Um, and can kind of help you save money and time with future edits because it goes over basically the top 10 most common edits that you will get from an editor. So if you can get those out of the way on your own, then you won't need to pay for an extra round of edits because most editors will tell you the stuff that's in this book. So I highly recommend, to just check it out. It's available on Amazon. You can get it on my website as well and take a peek at it and see if it helps you out with your own writing. Anybody who's here because they're fans of my books, thank you so much and welcome. And I'm very excited to have you here. And I hope you have questions about myself as a writer or myself as an editor. And I can't wait to get started. Without further ado, I've had this question asked a lot of times throughout my career. I think it's kind of a baseline question for a lot of writers, and I think a lot of writers feel like they don't know how to get out of it. There are a lot of different ways that you can, but I think I'll probably give three of the best that I know how. Um, I found that writer's block often happens because there's kind of a couple different ways. Either you are stuck on one thing and you don't know how to move forward, or you've kind of written your characters into a scenario that you don't know how to get them out of it. So for the first one, it's usually you don't feel inspired, you can't think of any creative new ideas, nothing is jumping out at you, you don't know what to write about, so you kind of get stuck. And I've often found, for myself at least, to do one of two things: either take a break from it for a couple days. Now, that doesn't help if you're thinking you've had writer's block for weeks now. But sometimes people get really, really stuck on it and they don't realize that actually giving your brain a break from it can bring you back into it much easier. Uh, a second thing you can do with that is honestly write a different scene from the book. So even if you don't use that scene, so say you have two characters who are on a spaceship and they're headed towards a planet, and the planet has like this big security grid system, and you don't know how to get your characters past the security grid and you're just stuck on this, that kind of situation. I guess that would be more for the second one. But you don't, like, you have no idea what would happen after they get past the security system, so you're kind of blocked by that. Let's say you write a scene where they don't get past it, or and then a scene where they do. So write the scenes after, and that might give you an idea of at least getting you back into writing, getting you creative, and then you can figure out the stuff in between afterwards, so that you're not bogged down by exactly what's happening to them or how to get them through it, and you don't have to decide on the choice until after you write it, because sometimes once you see it written down, then you know the correct path that you want to take. But sometimes until you can do that, your brain just stops you. um, so like I said, that works for if your characters are in a situation and you don't know how to get them past it, you can write past that situation and then come back to it. Or if you're just not sure what to write next, like for example, they're on a journey but you don't know where they're going next. So like my example of, hey, they came to a planet and there's a security grid, but you can't even get to that point. Like you're struggling with that even. Um, that's when I like to play the what if game. So it's a writing technique that I've used with a lot of people and with myself, and I found it very helpful, where you basically ask the question, what if? So if you are flying on a spaceship headed towards a destination, the question is, what if something happens? And it can be absolutely anything. So to make it a little bit more simpler, you can make it something from your real life. For example, what if you are traveling? So maybe not on a spaceship, but you're in a car, or you're on a train, or on a plane, and something happens. Anything can happen. And if you think about any time you've been in a car or on a train or on a plane, I'm sure something has happened to you, such as you got a flat tire or ran out of gas, or on the plane there was a screaming baby who got sick, or all the masks came down, depending on how dramatic you want it to be. Or on a train, the you were trying to walk and you spilled a bunch of food on someone because um, you kind of like wiggled too much on the train. So real life experiences can help you get past writer's block because you're playing the what if game. So depending on how extreme you want to go, your what ifs can also then become something that you haven't experienced, such as what if you got a flat tire, but then an alien ship came down and, you got to meet an extraterrestrial. Maybe that's happened to you. It has not happened to me, but it's something that you can extend the what if as far as you want and then apply it to your story. So I found that those two methods, either writing the scene ahead, both versions or multiple versions, can help you get past where you are, because then you're not fixated on where you're going, but you have options of where to go. And if nothing else, I'm definitely an options kind of person. The other part of it then is, like I said, play the what if game. So that's really useful to get yourself out of a situation or into a situation where you just don't know where to go next. So it gives you a bunch of ideas, and have them be as ridiculous as you want. Have a fire breathing dragon show up, even though this is supposed to take place in New York. Whatever you want to do, and then you can work around from there. But I found getting your brain to be creative, thinking outside the box, thinking of anything, any kind of forward momentum, is going to help you get past writer's block. This is an excellent question. I actually was on a panel um, several years ago now, where this was the topic of discussion, because people didn't understand, uh, or didn't know, like, when their book was done. They felt like they could always keep editing it, they could always keep making changes, they could always do more. And so there kind of gets this paranoia, this in your own head of, well, if I can always make changes to it, when is it done? When is it ready? When is it finished? And the piece of advice that I gave, and I'll elaborate on it for all of you, is that I've discovered that when you are changing perspective, but not actually improving the story anymore, then your story is done. So, what I mean by that is, your story can be written a million different ways. The tone of it, the style, the voice, the pacing, the character work, how much detail you give, how much detail you don't give, the emotional aspect. There's all different ways to write a book, and you're gonna get different feedback from different people. Now, an excellent editor is going to not only give you the feedback to help your story sound better, but also keep it within your voice and your style and what works best for you with that story. Some editors, it's a little bit more tricky. They want to make it the best story possible, but it may not quite fit with what you are trying to portray with your voice. Um, so you can often get conflicting feedback because of that, and then you're stuck in the like, well, which direction do I take this book? Do I want to have it be more romancy? Do I want it to have it be more action? Do I want it to be more detailed and more information? Do I want, all of that? And then even the nitty gritty details can bog you down as well. So when I talk about that, if as long as the perspective is still the same by the end, so that means once you have figured out your voice and your style, which does take a while, especially if you're a new writer, um, you can follow that, make the changes you need to, and then at the end, if all that's changing is perspective, for example, if I write, I shouldn't say if, I do, I write character driven books more than I write plot driven books. I'm fascinated by following the characters. I like to get in their heads. I like to have things happen to them and follow where they go. I like to root for the characters as I go, and that for me allows that to happen. So if I start getting feedback that is more plot driven, then I tend to. Sorry if there's stuff coming up in chat, and I do want to pay attention to that too. So some of these interruptions are that. Um, I tend to shy away from any feedback that pushes the book in a more plot driven direction. Now, I'll pay attention to it if my plot is lacking or if it needs if it needs more, but more often than not, it's a directional choice of how to write the book instead of the way that I would write the book. So at the end, if all I'm getting is feedback of like, I would write it more like this instead of, hey, this part didn't really make sense, I didn't understand it. Could you clarify? Or this is confusing, or I wasn't really sure how the characters got to this point. Like, those are things that make the book better, versus like, I didn't really like how you wrote this character because I don't like the character. That's an opinion and that's a perspective change. It's not necessarily a change to help the book. So when you finish, if the editing feedback is they don't like it because they don't like it and they wish it was written a different way, that's perspective. If they say they don't like it because they don't understand it or they are confused by it or anything that's about the story itself, those are things to pay attention to. So if you get to the point where people don't have the second part, they only would want to change perspective, then that's when I would say that your book is finished. When you write, it's personal, it's coming from you. And how you write is your voice. For example, if I'm writing a story that uh, has a lot of characters in it and has a lot of dialogue, the way that I would write it, like my voice as a writer, is going to determine how much dialogue, what kind of dialogue. It doesn't mean that it's not true to the characters, but part of me is going to come into this because I'm the one who's writing it. So if you write in someone else's voice, it's like mimicking them, which is, can be very flattering. And a lot of people do say like, "Oh, I love that this author does this and that author does that, and I want to do that too." And that's great. Like finding inspiration is great. Um, but you still need to at one point find yourself coming out with how you write this. So for example, I said that I'm a character-based writer, but a lot of my voice is the way that I write it, not just what I write. So style and tone are how the book comes across to the reader, but voice is what you put into it as a writer. And so that's why even if you follow writing rules, even if you write similarly to other people, the way that you write is always going to be unique. and that is going to come out. And a really good editor is going to find that and pull that out of you, and you'll learn it and you'll get comfortable in it and you'll feel it more, so that if you do write other books, that's going to come out way more easily as you go along. It seems like it's that question gets asked of most writers. I think it's probably one of the most common questions I get, besides are you famous or are you a millionaire? Um, and I think it's a very important question because a lot of people are impressed or in awe of how writers can come up with stories, how they can come up with themes, how they can come up with characters, which seems for some of them somewhat effortless. And for some writers, it's not. They spend a lot of time crafting and creating and working on scenarios and working on drafts and working on everything. And then you get someone like Stephen King, who just seems to pop a book out and it's just nothing because it just comes to him that easily. So I think part of the where does your inspiration come from, um, is a little bit twofold, and one of it is basically like how can you come up with this stuff, but also what inspires you, um, to write in general. So I'll kind of do a two part for this. I hope, because I didn't quite get if it was inspiration for one or the other. So as far as my I'll answer the second part first. So as far as my inspiration to write, I found for me that I really like seeing how a story is going to end, and in order for me to do that, I have to finish the book. Um, what I mean by that is I don't know the end of my books before I start writing them, or my stories. I don't know where they're going to go. I don't know how they're going to end up. And so it's almost like as I'm going, it gets revealed to me and shown to me. So if I want to see the ending, I have to finish the story. This allows me to start a lot of stories, and if I don't find myself interested in it, either I have to rework it or it's just not something that I feel like I would want to write, and I can just put it aside. If I get a book that I'm like, I need to know where this is going, it inspires me to keep writing because I want to find out what happens. Now, this works for people, who write in this style, but a lot of people are more methodical. They have, um, outlines, and they craft the whole story beforehand, and they know exactly what's going to happen at the end, and so then they like to write the journey along the way. So as far as that type of writer, they might have a different answer than me, but my inspiration is definitely, um, if something pops in my head and I have a scene and I kind of write it down, if I want to know what happens next, I have to write it, so it inspires me to continue writing. Um, the other part of the question is, where do I get my inspiration, as in my ideas for the stories? Honestly, it kind of comes back to the what ifs that I mentioned about writer's block. I really like to create scenarios, um, based on anything that's going around me, or if I'm watching a movie and I think of, well, how did they get into that room? Like even something as small as that could spark me to want to then write about it, to figure it out. My first book that I ever wrote, Illusion, which is a science fiction novel, it started with a woman who woke up in a room with no memories, and as a locked door, there were no windows. And I remember distinctly thinking to myself, I did not want a dead body in the room with her. I had seen that a number of times in a number of shows where they wake up, covered in blood, or there's, a dead body next to them. Um, I didn't want that. I just wanted her to have no idea what was going on. And I started to think, what if, there's the what if, that happened to me? So I put myself in that situation. Now, the way that she reacts may not be exactly the same as me, but it's what got me to start being able to think about how she may respond in that situation. Um, and so that was just based off of I did not want to have the same type of scenario where that I had seen so many times. And would it still be interesting? Would it still be something anybody cared about if there wasn't this big dramatic other thing that happened? And so that inspired me to move forward on that story, because I thought, well, who is this woman and why is she locked in this room? Because it wasn't about her getting out, it was who put her there, like who kept her there. So I kind of flipped it a little bit, and thought of it that way. And that made me want to then continue writing, because I would have to write to find out what happened next. So, um, inspiration for things for me are definitely just scenarios, and whether, like I said, it gets triggered by something. If I'm walking down an alley to catch a bus and I think about, what if something happened in this alley, or what if, the bus was driving towards me and couldn't stop, or what if, anything. That's where I get a lot of my inspirational scenes from, and I write them down when I want to, like, when I actually wonder past just the what if moment. So the what if happens, but I want to know what happens next. So in order to do that, I have to write it. So thank you for that question. I think some people, other people may have a lot of other answers, like they get inspiration from dreams, or they get inspiration from people watching, or other authors. There's a lot of different ways to get inspiration out there, but for me, it really comes from kind of what if scenarios. And then if I want to know what happens next, I got to write it. And so that inspires me to keep writing. Oof, such a good one. Um, Now, this is for people who've already written a book, but I have found that some new writers who are just starting off are already jumping ahead to that point, which is totally fine. Um, but you have a little bit more breathing room with it before you have to make any of those decisions. Traditionally published versus self-published. There's also hybrid publishing, which is basically you pay somebody to publish your books, but you keep all the rights. So they take care of all the publishing side of things. Sometimes they will have a marketing package as well, but you keep the rights and you get all the royalties. So it for some people that's the best of both worlds. But it really depends on what you want to put into the book. So I'm going to break it down a little bit. So that you understand what that means. So traditionally published, um, as currently, um, the biggest houses you would need an agent to get into. What that means is it's already been vetted by somebody who's in the business who thinks that your book is sellable. So the biggest thing that a traditionally published house is going to look for is, can I sell your book? This sometimes does not mean, is your book good? You can have a fantastic book, but if they don't know how to sell it, they can't sell it. That actually did happen to me with my first book, with Illusion, that I was telling you about. I did get an agent. I had an agent for 6 months. She shopped it around, and she kept getting over and over again that they really loved the book, but they didn't know how to sell it. Like, they didn't have anything that they could um, comparatively sell it against. So since their job is to be able to sell books to make a profit, a lot of times they do have to pass on really good books because there's just not a place for them, even if it's just that time frame, maybe the year before or the year after it would work. It's kind of a gamble that way. Um, they also take a percentage of sales, usually a fairly high percentage. Agents do as well. Now, agents work on commission, so unless they can get a deal for your book, they don't get any money. So if they take your book, that's a very big compliment, because it means that they're going to put the time and effort into trying to pitch it and get it to these houses and see if they can garner a deal so that they can make money off of it. Um, a lot of authors are astonished by high of a number that is, the percentage. I believe average for most traditional publishing houses is 70 to 75% of royalties, and commission for agents is around 10 to 15. So authors look at that and are just, aghast at how little that they would make per book, anywhere between 5 and 15% of off their royalties. Now, what doesn't quite come into play is that the publishing house usually deals with all of the things to get the book published. They deal with creating the cover, they deal with formatting. Oftentimes they'll do editing or at least a proofread, depending on how the quality of the book. They also do marketing, but they have distribution abilities, which most people by themselves don't. And this means to get to libraries, to get into bookstores, to get into schools, all that kind of stuff. So what you're paying for is basically uh, them to deal with all of that stuff. Now they pay for that out of pocket. So that's one of the reasons why they take such a large percentage, is because they need to pay themselves back. Some places will still offer an advance, but you have to pay that back out of your royalties later on. So it's not free money. It's not, hey, I'm going to give you this and then you just get money once your book is published. That comes out of your royalties. So it's always something to think about, that it might look good to get 10 grand up front, but it means until that 10 grand gets paid back, you don't get any royalties. But for a lot of people who are not tech savvy or don't have the time or don't have the money to personally invest in their own books, it's kind of nicer to just send a book off to somebody else to do all that, and you can start working on your next one, or you can go back to your job, or you can do whatever you want to do, that occupies your time. So what it ends up coming down to is, again, what you can invest into it as an author. And the hybrid companies, that's kind of the appeal for them. They're saying, hey, you pay us a bunch of money up front and we'll take care of all of that, the cover art, the formatting, the uploading, and you'll have our logo on it for our publishing company, and so it looks really professional. So we'll still cover all that, but you just pay us up front, and then you get to collect all the royalties. Like, we're basically a service for you, but we don't have any other real affiliation with you afterwards, except that you are under our publishing house. The self indie route of publishing is everything is on you, everything is out of pocket, everything is your time and your money. So that is the route that I ended up going, because, like I said, I kept getting publishers interested, but they didn't know how to sell it. So I had to learn how to sell my own stuff, because it didn't quite check the boxes that they needed to be sellable from their point of view. So, but that meant I had to find cover artists, I had to find formatters, I had to find editors, I had to pay all these people up front. Now, there's a lot of things out there that can help cut corners and cut costs, but there's a lot of stuff that's AI can do things. So there's a lot of programs that can help with editing, all that kind of stuff. But I found that having a person's point of view to make sure that nothing is missed, make sure that it the personal interaction is with you as an author instead of insert writer here, where they're just kind of editing or looking at it or churning stuff out under a formula. Now, some people, if you're fine with that, then and that works for you, that's great. I found that my stuff doesn't really fit under formulaic qualities, I guess. So I try to do more original cover art, and make sure that I have somebody to help me edit, because I like the interaction, I like the back and forth, I like to be able to ask them what they mean by this and see if it really helps or not, and that's important to me. So I spend the money on that because I feel like it makes my books higher quality, and that is something that matters to me for my books. Now, like I said, this isn't a knock on how anybody else does it, it's just how I feel about it. But I do have to then pay out of pocket. So I did decide to invest the time and energy into learning about cover art, learning about formatting, so that I can do those things myself. I have a fantastic graphic artist, Conrad Tevis, who I've worked with for years on my comics. So he helps with my covers to create them from my designs. And but I had to put the time and energy into learning all that so I could save money in the long run. So again, it's kind of a, which route do you want to take? Do you want to put time and money into stuff yourself? Um, uh, Indie publishing is definitely that route. There are a lot of shortcuts out there if you just kind of want to put your book out and get it done. And that's definitely a route that you could take. You can also try for a traditionally published or traditional publisher and kind of go through the process of that. If you just want it out of your hands, you want someone else to just do all the work and you can just go, keep writing. You can look at hybrid, which is, yeah, you pay them a big amount of money up front, but they do all that for you and then you get 100% royalties, which is appealing for a lot of people. So I think a lot of it depends on what you're willing to do towards your publishing journey and kind of what options you want. Now, I know people who have been signed by traditional publishers and have left them. I know people who were indie and then were signed by publishers. So it's also not like a forever decision either, but you always want to check with contracts because if they own the rights to something, sometimes it's for an extended period of time. So it may be like 5 years, which means you wouldn't be able to get your own rights back, even if it's not selling. But also, once you self publish, it's much, much more difficult to get a book traditionally published because it's already been out there. They don't want things that they have to redo unless for some reason, your stuff blows up like The Martian, and then everybody's scrambling for you because they want to reprint it themselves. But that's a pretty big exception to what usually happens. So, fantastic question. Thank you so much for it. So, I have a detective thriller series out, a 5 book series called the Detective Trann series, Trann. And the last book just came out last spring. So that was the final book in that series. It's so far been my most popular selling series. I'm not sure if that's just because of the genre or because people like that there's multiple books. But I feel like detective fiction is pretty edible quickly for readers, so I think that might be part of it. There's a lot of stuff that happens in those books. There's a lot of characters in those books, and it does conclude at the end. But I could see why somebody may ask if there are going to be any more. There are definitely other stories that could happen in that world. Um, as for right now, I am not planning any more books, but I do know that I am not the best person to concretely say never will I ever. I think I've had too many things happen in my life where I thought this would never happen, and then it did. So I definitely think that there's a possibility for it in the sense of I may have a what if moment. I may be thinking about the books or talking about the books or going over them with somebody and think about a character or think about a moment and have the, well, what if they did so and so, or what, like, how did they get out of that situation? Do I want to see that? Do I want to write that? So I can't, like I said, I can't definitely say no. I have no plans at this point in time, um, but it's definitely a world that is explorable beyond just the 5 book set. Now, would I follow Detective Trann anymore, Sean? Um, it kind of feels less likely. I feel like if I did write other books, it would be off of other characters, um, which is something that I have definitely done. I do like to. I mean, I guess they're kind of like spin-offs. I don't really think of them that way. I just think of it more like these people had their own stories going on at the same time, and I really want to explore those stories. Um, so they kind of become this a story of their own. I think that there are so many fascinating characters in that series that I would really love to know what happens to them next. But I don't know if it's enough inspiration for me to do so. At least not right now. That the book I'm working on now is not related to that at all. But I can't say I'm going to take it off the table completely. So I'll leave it at that for now. Again, I think that there's kind of two answers depending on what exactly is meant by this question. So if it's like, how do I start writing the book versus how do I start the book? So I'll just kind of cover both because that way both things get covered just in case. I don't want to assume I know which one it is. So let's start with how do I start writing a book? We'll break it down into probably the more basic form of that, um, especially if you have a good idea. So good ideas are very enticing. I've met a lot of people at a lot of different conferences and conventions and the like, um, who come up to me and say they have a good idea for a book, and they're very excited about it and want to work on it and want to have um, forward progress with it, but they don't really know how to start the writing process. The first thing that I always think about with that is to decide if you want to be the writer, the author of this book. I think a lot of people think that they do and kind of jump off uh, in that direction, but um, writing is not for everybody. And I don't mean that in the sense of, um, that you can't write your own book, but it's a job. It's a real job, and it takes time and it takes energy and it takes effort and focus and making sure you want to do it and finish it can get really overwhelming once you get into it because there are a lot of moving pieces that have to take place to make a book a full book. So there are ghostwriters out there. I've helped people with writing their books. So it's definitely an option if you have a really good story and you want to be a part of the writing process, but maybe not do the writing yourself. So before I even, kind of answer that question, I would say make a decision about what would work best for you in that sense. If you've decided that you do want to be the writer of the book, the author of the book, um, I would say the best place to start for most people who are first starting off um, is to kind of write a real basic, could just be a paragraph or some sentences um, about what you want your book to be about. I mean, because if it's something like a memoir or nonfiction, you definitely want to write what the book is about. But the second part of it is what do you want to get from the story when you write it? If it's a fiction novel, and you write like me where you don't know the end so you maybe don't have those answers, um, then it's more of I would just say literally just start writing. Like it doesn't have to be the beginning of the book, it doesn't have to be page one. It can be any scene at any point in time, and don't get stuck on keeping that scene, but it's just a way for you to start writing. So if you know your book is going to be about um, a tree person who walks around and gives high fives to everybody. Okay, let's say that that's your story. Um, don't ask me where that came from. I have no idea. Okay. Instead of starting with the history of the tree or how the tree came to be or anything, you could just write a scene where they are walking through town and trying to high five people. And does everybody do it? Did they not do it? Is this, And from there you can get like the feel of the character, how they move, how they act, how they interact with people, the people around them, and you can branch off from there, both going forward and going backwards. So you don't have to start at the beginning in order to start writing a book. So if it helps you to write, summaries and outlines, and just get the stuff down that you want to be in the book, that you already know, you can kind of picture in your head, do it that way. If you want it to be where you don't really know what's going to happen, but you just think this could be a cool book, or you have a cool idea or a cool premise, just start writing a scene, and it doesn't matter what scene it is. So I think that those are probably um, a way to start writing the book itself. Um, the second part of that question, then, or the second version of that question, was how do I start a book? As in, like, where do I start a book? Um, how does the book begin as a book? Um, it's a tough one. I think people can get a little bit hung up on a great opening line, a great moment in time in the book. It has to grab you right away, which is true, but it can also lead to forcing the way that the story starts. Um, and oftentimes lead to prologues, which I have a whole section in my book about that, to be honest, because that question has, maybe I can answer that another time, but the question of prologues, yay or nay, has come up a lot of times in my life and for other writers and for myself as an editor when dealing with writers. So anyway, that can be something that comes up. Sometimes prologues are used to create a more dramatic scene or to throw people in the middle of something because they feel like the opening is too slow or too boring. Um, and the figuring out where to start, like for me, I've found that I kind of just start writing with a scene, and then it'll it'll come across if that scene is later in the book or not. And what I mean by that is, okay, I have to set up first what happened before this, or I can start here and go from here, or um, you know, or like this goes somewhere else, but I don't know what comes around it, and you kind of have to work through it that way. So I always try to recommend to people that focusing on where the book starts um, is a really good way to block you. You can get really hung up on how to start it, and I think because of that too, and I don't know if this happens to any of you other writers, you tend to re-edit like the same beginning over and over and over again. Um, because you'll get a little bit farther and you'll kind of and then you're like, well, let me just start over. And so you get caught in this editing loop of continually going back and re-looking at what you've done and reworking what you've done. And that to me is why I say things like jump to another scene. Like just forget about the beginning. It may not even stay the beginning. The more fluid you can be about your writing and about your book, I think the stronger chance you're going to have of being able to move things around where they need to be, find where something is supposed to be, determine the right order of things because you have a little bit more flexibility with it. Now, I know that's really hard, especially if you write a scene that you love and you feel like it doesn't fit anymore. I've definitely had that happen. I had a whole scene in one of my books where there was this huge blowout, like a huge fight between the villain and the main character. And when I went back and kind of filled in the stuff before that, that scene didn't make sense anymore. And I was pretty upset about it because I really liked the scene, but I had to let it go because it wasn't where the story went. So finding out how to start a book, um, I wouldn't get too hung up on it. Um, just start putting words down on a page, start doing summaries and outlines, whichever method works for you better. And you can always go back and work around the beginning because that's kind of the nice thing about storytelling is yes, you need to have a start to an end when you're telling the story, But until you figure out how to tell that story, the parts are movable and you can work around that easier. And if you can go in with that idea and that notion in your head, I think you're going to have a much easier time of figuring out where the book is supposed to start. So, again, thank you for that question. Um, it was a wonderful one, and I hope that I helped with what I said, even though I kind of gave two different versions, but I this way I covered both sides of it. Okay, so um, this is where I'm going to stop. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to stop recording first, so I'll stay on the stream for a few more minutes to chat. But I really appreciate the questions. Please keep them coming. And if there's anything you'd want to see for next time, please feel free to reach out to me and let me know. Um, and yeah, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you.